On a hill in southern Turkey, rings of carved stone pillars stand in the open dirt. The tall ones are slabs of limestone the height of a giraffe, and every line on them was cut by hand, scraped out with a sharper stone, because whoever made them had no metal. They had no wheel to drag the pillars into place, and they could not write a single word, because nowhere on earth yet could anyone write a single word. They built it 11,500 years ago. That is older than the first farm, older than the first wheel, the first written letter, the first city. There was not one city anywhere on the planet the day it went up. It was already 6,000 years old on the morning workers laid the first block of the Great Pyramid in Egypt. And cut low on one of those pillars there is a fox. A small one, mid-run, the long tail, the pointed face, the legs gathered to spring, all of it exactly right. Somebody crouched in front of that stone with a chip of flint and made it, on purpose, beautiful. Then they went home and lived and died and were forgotten so completely that this fox is the only thing of theirs left on earth. So stand on that hill and ask the obvious thing. Who did this? How do you set a stone the height of a giraffe on end and carve a running fox into its side with bare hands and a sliver of flint before anyone, anywhere, had a wheel, a farm, or a loaf of bread? For as long as we've asked, we've reached for the same answer. It wasn't these people. It was someone better, someone we lost. It's a good story, so let's give it room. Somewhere behind us it goes. There was one people who knew more than we do, who read the sky and cut and lifted stone heavier than anything we could lift today. They built the pyramids in Egypt and the standing stones in Britain and the giant stone heads on Easter Island, all of it with the same pair of hands. Then the sea rose and swallowed them in an afternoon. Plato wrote the place down 360 years before the Common Era and called it Atlantis. Marble streets, columns gone green under the water, a whole island empire, lost in a single day and a single night. Centuries later, we handed them a second continent to drown on and named it Mu. We've told some version of it for as long as we've had stories, that the ones who truly knew how came first, and we are the ones who forgot. And it has an answer for the fox too, a breathtaking one. We're going to chase that answer all the way up, to the version where this one small carving is a single word in a language of stars, written across the whole earth by people who are gone. And then we're going to find the true one, because the connection the story reaches for is real. The fox really is tied to the pyramids and the standing stones. It's only that how turned out to be the last thing anyone guessed. The dream doesn't stop at one drowned city. Its real power, the thing that makes it irresistible, is the idea that the lost ones left their fingerprints everywhere. That all the great stones of the world are pages from a single book, written in a single hand. It had, for a while, a respectable scientific cousin. In 1864, a zoologist named Philip Sclater was puzzled by lemurs. You find them, and their fossils, in both Madagascar and India, with a whole ocean of Africa in between. How does a creature that cannot swim end up on two far shores? He proposed a sunken land bridge, a drowned continent, and named it Lemuria, after the lemurs. It was a reasonable guess for its time. It was also too beautiful to stay in the journals. It escaped. Mystics filled the drowned continent with exactly the people we always wanted down there. Tall, serene, brilliant. Astronomers, architects, people who knew how. And once you've imagined people like that, you start to see their hand in every hard, heavy, ancient thing on earth. The pyramids too precise, the standing stones too aligned, the giant heads, the buried temples. They did this, the dream whispers, all of it, the same hand. They sailed the whole world and taught us, and then they sank, and we forgot. It's the most satisfying story there is, because it explains everything at once, and we are suckers, all of us, for the story that explains everything at once. The whole scattered, mysterious inheritance of human stone, tied up in a single ribbon. No loose ends, no coincidences. One source, one secret, one sorrow. And the place where this dream gets its sharpest, most dazzling proof, the place where it stops being a feeling and starts feeling like evidence, is back on that hill in Turkey, with the fox. Because the dream has a breathtaking answer for why that fox is there at all. Come back to the hill. The place is called Göbekli Tepe, Potbelly Hill. And the fox does not stand alone. On the pillars there is a whole stone bestiary, snakes, scorpions, wild boar, cranes, and again, vultures, great birds with their wings spread wide. And there is one slab the diggers numbered pillar 43, that everyone else calls the Vulture Stone. On it, a great bird stands with one wing bent up, and balanced on that wing, held, or offered, or sheltered, is a disc, a circle, a ball. Below the bird, a scorpion, snakes, smaller birds, and down at the bottom, small and strange, a little headless man. Now here is the dream's answer to why a fox runs across that ancient stone, and I'll give it to you at full strength, the way its believers feel it, because for a moment it will sound exactly true. What if these animals aren't animals at all? What if they're constellations? What if the scorpion is the constellation we still call Scorpius, and the great vulture is the patch of sky we call Sagittarius, and the disc balanced on the wing is the sun, sitting in that exact spot among the stars? What if the whole pillar isn't a picture of a place, but a picture of a sky, one particular night, frozen into stone? And here's where the carving stops being a picture and becomes a clock. Spin a top, and as it slows it does two things at once. It spins, and it also leans, and the lean swings slowly around in a wide, lazy circle. The Earth does exactly that. It turns once a day, but its tilted axis also swings around a circle of its own, one full sweep every 26,000 years, and as it swings, it drags the whole sky very slowly out of place. So if you know which star sat where, you can read the date. You can ask the stone what year it was looking at. And the answer the dreamers get back is a date, around 10,950 years before the Common Era, nearly 13,000 years ago. And something happened around then. Something real. The world had been warming out of the last ice age, and then it lurched, plunged back into deep cold, within a human lifetime, for over 1,000 years. We call it the Younger Dryas. We still argue about what caused it. But the dream has an answer, and it is spectacular, a comet. A great body, or a swarm of them, striking the earth, throwing a veil across the sun. So read the Vulture Stone again, the dreamer's way. It is not decoration. It is a diary entry. The record of the worst night the world had ever seen, the night the sky caught fire and the cold came down, carved by people who survived it, who pointed at the very stars it happened under, and set that little headless man below as a mark for the dead. The oldest message we ever wrote. A note pressed into limestone that says, "This happened, here, under these stars. Don't forget." And it didn't stop in 2017. As recently as 2024, the same researcher argued that the little V-shaped marks on that pillar are something even bolder, a calendar. 365 days, counted in stone, with the summer solstice singled out, and the comet remembered in the same breath. The world's oldest calendar, the headline said. Carved before farming, before writing, by people watching the sky with a patience we can barely imagine. It is, I'll be honest, one of the most beautiful ideas I've ever met. A message in a bottle, 13,000 years long. And the fox is right there in it, one more sign in a sky language we forgot how to read. And the dream still has its biggest move to make. If these people could write the sky into stone, here, before farming, before writing, then why would they have stopped here? This is where the dream becomes a theory of everything. Because once you've seen the sky in one set of stones, you start to see it in all of them, as if a single teacher had walked the whole earth. Look at the pyramids of Giza. 3 of them, in a line, the third smaller and nudged off to one side. And up in the sky, the belt of Orion, 3 stars in a row, the third fainter and nudged off the line. The dream says, no accident. The pharaohs laid the pyramids out as a map of Orion's belt, a a mirror of heaven built on the desert floor. A writer named Robert Bauval made this idea famous in 1994, and once you've seen it, you cannot unsee it. 3 stones, 3 stars, the same crooked little line. Look at the bull. The great horned bull turns up carved and painted everywhere, on these Turkish pillars, in a Turkish town called Çatalhöyük a couple of thousand years later, where they set real bull horns into the walls of their houses, and deeper still, 17,000 years deep, on the painted walls of the caves at Lascaux in France. And there is a bull in the sky too, the constellation Taurus, with the little misty cluster of the Pleiades riding its shoulder. The dream says it's the same bull, that we have been drawing the same constellation for 17,000 years, passed hand to hand, down and down. Look at Stonehenge, out on its English plain, and the dream says it isn't only a circle, it's a machine, a computer of stone with rings of holes for counting, that could predict the eclipses of the sun and the moon. An astronomer named Gerald Hawkins argued exactly that in 1965, in a book he called Stonehenge Decoded. The wise ones, it seemed, had left a calculator on the grass. And then the dream crosses the oceans, and this is where it becomes overwhelming, because the pyramids aren't only in Egypt. Across an entire ocean, in the highlands of Mexico, a people raised pyramids too, and not small ones. At a city we call Teotihuacan, they built a pyramid of the sun 200 feet high, a tower of stone 20 stories tall, and a pyramid of the moon, and ran a great avenue between them straight as a ruled line. A city that, at its height, held more than 100,000 people. And here's the detail that feeds the dream perfectly. We do not know who built it. Not their name, not their language, not what they called their own gods. A city of 100,000 souls, and the builders walked off the edge of memory. Down in the Andes, the Inca fitted stone so perfectly it looks like a trick. At a place called Sasahuaman, above Cusco, there are walls made of boulders the weight of locomotives, 100 tons, 200 tons, and they are cut and ground to meet each other along long, mad, wandering joints, with no mortar, so tightly that the old Spanish chroniclers said you couldn't slip a coin into the seam, without iron, without the wheel. And so, a man named Eric von Däniken built a whole career, starting in 1968, telling the world the only same explanation was that it wasn't us at all, that something came down from the stars and showed us how. And out in the Pacific, on a reef in Micronesia, there is a whole city built from colossal basalt logs stacked across 90-odd little islands, laced with canals, man-made-al, the Venice of the Pacific. Churchward, the man who sold us Moo, pointed straight at it. There, he said, a relic of the drowned motherland, risen out of the sea. That is the dream at its absolute height. Not one drowned city, one drowned civilization. One brilliant people who watched the heavens, learned to read them, and then went out across the whole world. Egypt, England, Turkey, Peru, Mexico, the painted dark of France, the reefs of the Pacific, and taught everyone to raise stone toward the stars, leaving the same sky encoded on every continent. One book, one hand, written everywhere, and then gone, taking the knowledge down with them, and leaving the rest of us to squint up at stone we can no longer read. It explains everything. It's perfect. And now I have to take it apart, gently, because the morning always comes. The dream is beautiful. It just doesn't hold, and it breaks in 3 places, each one quiet, each one final. Start with the Vulture Stone, and that thrilling carved date, 13,000 years ago. The people who actually dig at this hill, who have spent careers on their knees in its dirt, checked it against the one thing that doesn't lie, the age of the building itself. Here is how that works. Every living thing, every tree, every gazelle, takes in a faint trace of radioactive carbon the whole time it is alive, and the day it dies, that trace begins to fade at a fixed, clock-steady rate. So a scrap of charcoal from an old hearth, or a splinter of bone, carries its own death date sealed inside it. You measure how far the trace has faded, and the fire gives up its year. And when they read the year out of the building that holds the Vulture Stone, it came back about 1,000 years younger than the date the dreamers found in its carvings. It is like finding a gravestone carved with a date 1,000 years before the mason who cut it was born. The diary entry describes a night that happened 10 centuries before there was anyone standing on that hill to carve it. The clock, beautiful as it is telling a time that cannot be right. Then there's the grand idea, one wise people who taught the whole world. It breaks on something even simpler. On dates, on the plain order of things. Because the great stones, when you finally line them up by age, are in the wrong order for a single source. This Turkish hill is 7,000 years older than the pyramids of Giza. The great tomb at Newgrange in Ireland, with its own buried chamber that catches the midwinter sunrise, is older than the pyramids. The stone temples of Malta are older than the pyramids. The endless rows of standing stones at Karnak in France, 3,000 of them and more, are older than the pyramids. And the pyramids of Mexico were raised thousands of years after Egypt's by people who could not possibly have met an Egyptian. And look closer at those two kinds of pyramid, because the difference is the whole argument. The Egyptian pyramid is a smooth-sided, pointed, sealed tomb, built so that almost no one would ever go inside. The Mexican pyramid is a flat-top platform with a grand staircase up the front and a temple on top, built precisely so that people would climb it in front of crowds for ceremony. Same word, opposite buildings, opposite purposes. If one teacher had handed out the blueprint, why are they built backwards from each other? They look alike for the most ordinary reason in the world. A wide, stacked, stepped pile is simply the most stable way to build something tall and heavy out of stone. Gravity gives everyone the same answer. Here is the thing you cannot get around. The teacher cannot be younger than the student. The source of a thing cannot come after the things it supposedly caused. When an archaeologist named Colin Renfrew got his hands on radiocarbon dating in the early 1970s, this is exactly what shattered the old story that civilization rippled outward from one clever source. The downstream monuments kept turning out older than the fountain they were supposed to flow from. There was no one hand. There couldn't have been. And there's a third crack, the hardest one, and we should look at it honestly before we let the dream go. Because that lovely idea, a superior lost race built the monuments, has a long shadow. Whenever that story gets told, it tends to mean one quiet, ugly thing. The people who actually lived there couldn't have done it themselves. When Europeans found the great stone city of Great Zimbabwe, built across centuries by the ancestors of the Shona people, they refused, for decades, to believe Africans had built it. It must have been Phoenicians, they said, or the Queen of Sheba, or some lost white race. One early excavator dug out and threw away the African layers looking for his imaginary foreigners. It took an archaeologist named Gertrude Caton Thompson in 1929 to prove with the plain evidence of the ground that the city was African, built by Africans, and even then, a later government tried to censor the finding. The same thing was said of the giant statues of Easter Island and the Andean walls and the city in the Pacific. Surely not them. Surely someone better. And as for the man who said the stars built Sacsayhuaman, it's worth knowing how that story ends. Years later, von Däniken admitted, in an interview, that some of the evidence in his best-selling books was simply invented. He had made it up. The aliens were never in the stones. They were in the marketing. That is the engine hidden inside the dream. It is very often a way of taking a real and astonishing human achievement and handing the credit to somebody who was never there. And the moment you see that, the dream loses its shine, and the true story gets immeasurably more beautiful, because the true story gives the credit back. So let's go back to the hill, for real this time, and meet the people the dream was so sure could not have done it. For 10,000 years, this was just a low rise in the land. Farmers worked the slope and cursed the buried slabs their plows kept catching. A dead mulberry tree stood at the top. And then, in the 1990s, an archaeologist came with a hunch that the gravestones were something else and started to dig, and what came up out of that hill stopped the world. Pillars, enormous ones, T-shaped slabs of limestone, taller than a room, 3 times the height of a person, ringed and standing, with 2 giants in the center of each circle, like the 2 most important figures at a gathering. Göbekli Tepe is, as far as we know, the oldest monumental architecture on the face of the earth. And here is the part that broke the textbook in half. We had a story about how this is supposed to happen, and it ran in a strict order. First, people settle down and farm. Farming makes surplus. Surplus makes towns and bosses and spare hands. And then, with all that in place, you can finally afford to build something huge and secret. Farming first, temples much later. That was the rule. Göbekli Tepe is older than farming. The people who quarried and shaped and stood these pillars had no farms, no fields of grain, not yet, no pottery, no metal of any kind. Every line in that stone was cut with other stone. No wheel, no writing. They were hunter-gatherers, the very people the old story swore could never build a thing like this, because they were supposed to be too busy chasing the next meal. And they built a cathedral anyway, before the farm, before the town, before bread. It turned the whole story upside down. Maybe some archaeologists now think it wasn't full bellies that freed us to build temples. Maybe it was the other way round. Maybe the gathering came first, the need to come together, to haul and feast and build something enormous, and the need to feed all those gathered people is part of what pushed us toward farming in the first place. Maybe we didn't settle down and then find the sacred. Maybe we reached for the sacred and it made us settle down. And it was not one free kill, and this is the part I find hardest to get over. Just over the way, at a place called Karahan Tepe, and across a whole scatter of sites in those same hills, the same people left the same kind of work, rings of pillars, carved animals, a chamber of standing stones with a human head watching from the living rock, a whole landscape of them, not one lonely temple. A people, a culture, with a style, with ideas they carried from hill to hill for centuries. And we even have their face. In a museum in Şanlıurfa stands the oldest life-size statue of a human being ever found, a man carved from limestone, roughly the same unthinkable age as the fox. He has no mouth. His hands are clasped low in front of him, and his eyes are made of black stone, obsidian, set into the sockets, so that across 11,000 years he is still, unmistakably, looking at you. That is who the dream insisted could not have built any of this. A people with a face, and a style, and a sky they watched, and dead they grieved. Let's listen, finally, to what they actually had to say. Let's go back to the fox. Why a fox? Not a constellation, it turns out. Something better. Here's the first clue, and it's a lovely piece of detective work. The people who study this place did something simple. They made 2 lists. On one, every animal these people carved. On the other, every animal whose bones they left in their trash, the things they actually hunted and ate. The 2 lists barely touch. What did they eat? Mostly gazelle, wild cattle, the ordinary meat of the plain. But what did they carve? Snakes, more snakes than anything else by far. Foxes, scorpions, vultures, boar with their tusks out. Dangerous things, fierce things. And here's the detail that gives me chills, the good kind. They carved more snakes than any other animal, and in all that trash, all those bones, there was not a single snake bone. They never ate the snakes. The most carved animal in the whole place was never once on the menu, which can only mean one thing. These carvings were never a record of dinner. They weren't drawing what they ate. They were drawing what they meant. Every fox, every snake, every vulture was a choice, a word in a language of meaning, not a photograph of the food supply. They had the skill to carve anything, the foxes rendered in quick, living, perfect detail. And they chose, on purpose, to fill their great temple not with the comfortable animals they lived on, but with the wild and the dangerous and the dead. That isn't a primitive scratching. That's art. That's a people with an inner life, deciding what to say. And the fox, where exactly is the fox? Because once you really look at those giant T-shaped pillars, you stop seeing slabs at all. They are people. The tall shaft is a body. The wide top is a head, faceless, turned to watch the room. Down the sides, carved in low relief, are arms, long arms, bending at the elbow, with hands that come round to the front and almost meet over the belly. Somewhere a carved belt. And one of the great central figures wears, hanging from that belt like a loincloth, the pelt of an animal. A fox. The fox is the figure's clothing. A fox skin, carved in stone, worn by a faceless stone giant standing in the middle of the ring. So picture the real answer to why a fox. Not a star sign, not a code. A ring of tall, faceless stone people. Ancestors, maybe, or spirits. The diggers are careful and honest in saying they don't fully know. Standing together in the half-dark, arms folded over their bellies, watching. And one of them, the greatest, wears a fox at his waist, because to the person who carved it, the fox meant something urgent and real, something we will probably never fully recover. The fox isn't pointing at the heavens. It's pointing at them. It's a piece of who they were. And they were people who lost people, the same way everyone does. This is the gentlest, most human thing I can tell you about them. At Göbekli Tepe, for all the digging, no proper cemetery has ever been found, no neat graves, no bodies laid out to rest. What turns up instead are pieces of people, human bone, scattered through the place. And among it, a few human skulls that were not simply left there. They were worked. Carefully, with flint, someone had cut a deep groove along the top of these skulls, front to back, and in at least one, drilled a small hole. The most careful reading, by the scientists who held those bones, is that the groove and the hole were for a cord. So the skull could be hung, carried, kept. I know how that can land, so let me turn it the right way up. Because the right way up is tender. Think about what it means to keep someone's skull, to drill it so gently, and hang it where you live. Think of all those vultures on the walls, wings spread. Across this whole ancient world, the vulture meant one thing, the carrying of the dead. You laid your dead out high, and the great birds came, and take the body up into the sky, and what came back down to you, clean and light, was the skull of the person you loved. And you kept it. You bound it with a cord and held it close. A couple of thousand years later, in that same region, at Catalhoyuk, people went on doing a version of this. They buried their dead beneath the floors of their own houses, under the very platforms where they slept. They slept, every night, on top of their ancestors. They could not bear to put them outside. The vulture on the Vulture Stone was never the constellation Sagittarius. It was grief. It was the oldest, most universal human fact there is, that the people we love die, and we cannot stand to simply let them go, so we find some way to carry them with us. These people did it with a cord and a clean skull and a great bird on the wall. We do it with a photograph in a frame. It is exactly the same ache. 11,000 years has not changed it by a single degree. They were not gods, not serene astronomer priests from a drowned utopia. They were people in the cold who buried their dead in the sky and could not say goodbye. And now we can finally answer the question the whole dream was built on. Why? Why did they build it? And why did everyone, everywhere, keep building? Here is the question that was hiding under the whole night. Forget who built the monuments. Ask why. Why does it keep happening? Why do people who never met, on every continent, separated by whole oceans and thousands of years, all reach for the same heavy stone? And the answer, when you finally hear it, is the connection the dream was chasing the entire time. It was real. It was just never a bloodline. There are a handful of reasons a human being picks up a stone too heavy to lift, and every people on earth found them on their own. The first is the dead. We have just seen it, the cord, the kept skull, the ancestors under the floor. The oldest impulse may simply be that we refuse to let the dead vanish, so we give them a permanent address in stone, a tune, a standing figure, a name that outlasts the body. On 4 continents, unconnected, the saying move, oust the dead so they can't be lost. The second is the sky, and this is the one I love most, because it's the dream's own evidence, handed back true. The sun really is written into the stones, everywhere, only no one taught it. At Newgrange in Ireland, for a few minutes on the midwinter morning, a single blade of sunrise threads through a stone slot above the door, crawls the length of a long dark passage, and fills a buried chamber with gold. And over the doorway someone carved the triple spiral, 5,000 years ago, that we still cannot fully read. On a temple in Malta, the equinox light comes straight through the door and lies down along the central aisle. At Stonehenge, the great avenue frames the solstice sun. And high in the Andes at Machu Picchu, the Inca built a curved stone tower with a single window, and on the one morning of the year that the year turns, the sunrise comes through that window and lands on a cut edge of rock inside. They had a name for the kind of stone that catches the sun. They called one of them the Intihuatana, the hitching post of the sun, a stone you could tie the sun to, the sacred cord, on the shortest day, so that it would not wander off and abandon the world. None of these people had ever heard of any of the others. They all looked up at the same sun, the one clock hanging over every human head, and they all, separately, aimed their heaviest stone at the morning it turns, and some of them tried, gently, to hold it there. Not a shared secret, a shared sky. The third reason is stranger, and the diggers at Göbekli Tepe think it might be the deepest. The point may never have been only the finished temple. It may have been the building of it, hundreds of people coming together to quarry and haul and carve, and then to feast. There are signs of enormous gatherings on that hill, the smashed bones of whole herds of gazelle, and great stone vats that may have held the first beer, brewed from wild grain. Picture it, the work, and the firelight, and the feast at the end of the hauling. Because here is the quiet insight. You don't build the monument because you're already a people. Building it together is what makes you one. The shared exhaustion, the shared meal, the shared thing too big for any one of you, that is the forge that turns a crowd into an us. The temple wasn't built by a community. The community was built by the temple. And the fourth reason is almost funny and entirely human: power. A monument is, in the coldest terms, a colossal waste of effort, and that is exactly the point. To move 100-ton stone for no practical reason at all is to announce to your rivals and your children, look how strong we are. Look how many of us there are, and how completely we obey. We are so mighty we can spend a generation moving rock for nothing. The wastefulness is the message. The uselessness is the boast. And underneath all four, the dead, the sky, the gathering, the boast, there is the barest thing. The thing the fox is really for. The need to mark the world. To say this place matters. To leave something behind that outlasts you. To press I was here into something that won't rot or forget. That ache is not Egyptian or Turkish or Incan. It's human. It's the whole species in every age doing the bravest ordinary thing there is. And here is the proof, the most perfect proof imaginable, and it's true, not invented. When the Aztecs walked into the Valley of Mexico in the 1300s, they found the colossal pyramids of Teotihuacan already standing, already ancient, abandoned and overgrown for 600 or 700 years. They had no idea who built them. The builders were long gone, their language lost, their name forgotten. So the Aztecs looked up at those impossible stones and felt exactly what you feel standing in front of them now, and did exactly what we do. they decided it must have been someone greater than themselves. They named the place Teotihuacan, the birthplace of the gods, and they told a story about it. In the story, the world had gone dark, and the gods gathered there, at the foot of those pyramids, around a great fire, and asked which of them would throw himself into the flames and become the new sun. The proud, rich, handsome god stepped up first and faltered at the edge of the heat 4 times and could not do it. And then a small, poor, sickly god, covered in sores, the one nobody expected, walked to the fire without stopping and threw himself in and rose into the sky as the sun. The proud one, shamed, jumped in after and rose as a second sun, too bright, so the gods threw a rabbit at his face to dim him, and he became the moon. And to this day, the Aztecs said, "You can see the rabbit in the moon." Look at what the Aztecs did. They stood in front of a mystery they could not explain and reached for wiser, greater beings to fill the silence. The very same reaching that, centuries later, gave us Atlantis and Mu and the lost race who really built the pyramids. The dream of the wise ones who came before isn't a clue about the past. It's a thing the human mind does in front of anything old and enormous in every age, on every continent. It is so deeply human that the people we now call ancient were already doing it, gazing up at ruins, inventing gods to explain people who were only people, like them, like us. So the monuments are connected after all, not by a sunken motherland, not by one hand. They're connected the way leaves on different trees are the same shape, because the same forces, acting on the same kind of being, keep producing the same answer. One species, with one sky overhead, one certainty of death, and one unkillable need to leave a mark, kept arriving, alone and unprompted, all over the earth, at the same handful of solutions. We house our dead in stone. We aim our buildings at the sunrise. We haul rock together until the hauling makes us a people. We waste the impossible to prove we are strong. And we mark the world to say, "I was here." That's not a lost civilization. That's a shared one. It's all of us. And it's still going. So, come back now. Out of the deep past, out of the sea and the sky and the drowned cities, back from the pyramids and the standing stones and the gods around the fire. Back to the hill. Back to the fox. The fox is still there. It's dark on that hill in Turkey and cold, and the fox is exactly where it has been for 11,500 years, cut into the side of a stone person under the stars it was never a map of. And we know now why it's there. It isn't a constellation. It isn't a comet's date, or a code, or a message from a vanished race of gods. It's simpler than that, and so much better. It's a choice. Somebody knelt down in the half-light one day with a sharp piece of stone and carved a fox onto the body of a stone giant. And got it right, the tail just so, the sharp little face. They bothered to make it beautiful. And then they stood up and went back to their fire, and their dead, and their ordinary, frightening, wonderful life, with no idea, none at all, that the smallest thing they made that day would outlast their language, their gods, their names, their whole world, and be the one thing left to say they had been here. That's what we kept dreaming of. Every time anyone has ever felt that ache for the wise ones who came before, that is who was back there. Not gods, not Atlanteans, not serene drowned masters with a lost manual. People. Pulled, clever, grieving, looking up people, making careful, beautiful, immortal marks in the dark. Doing exactly what we still do. They were the wise ones. And they were us. We come from them, an unbroken line of cold, clever hands reaching all the way back to that fox. And every pair of those hands, in every age, looked up at the same dark you can see from any window, and felt the same small, unkillable need to leave something behind. The hunter-gatherer, kneeling in the cold, carving a fox. The Irish farmer, aiming a tomb at the midwinter sun. The Egyptian, squaring his pyramid to the turning point of the sky. The islander, raising a stone face to watch over the village. The Aztec, staring up at ruins, inventing the gods who must have built them. The same animal, the same sky, the same need. All the way down and all the way back up to you. You don't have to build anything. You don't have to carve a thing. The line holds without anyone lifting a finger. It has held for 11,500 years, and it is holding now. The fox is still on the hill. The stars are still turning, slowly, the way they turned over the people who made it. And somewhere in the long, patient quiet of all of it, the oldest message we ever left is still saying the only thing it ever said. Someone was here, someone like us, and they were not afraid to make their mark in the dark. Good night.